Mr. President, I'm here to talk on the floor today about the 31,000 people a year, 2,600 a month, 86 a day. These are rough numbers that are killed by guns all across the country. For a lot of the kids who grow up in neighborhoods like the north end of Hartford or the east end of Bridgeport, it feels like a war zone because they fear for their life every day that they're walking to school. They're dealing with levels of PTSD when virtually every one of these kids knows someone very close to them that's been shot that rival the diagnoses that come back from war zones abroad. And Mr. President, today in my campaign to try to bring the voices of victims to the floor of the Senate, I want to talk about one aspect of this epidemic all across the country, and that's the epidemic of young children being killed accidentally by guns. The numbers are really hard to believe that in this country, in any one given year, there's somewhere between 2,000 to 3,000 children and teens who die from guns in the United States. And that doesn't even count all of the kids who suffer non-fatal gun injuries. In 2010, the official number is about 18,000. And there's a lot of reporting that suggests that the numbers that we know are dramatically lower than what the actual numbers are. There are a lot of injuries that happen in the home because of guns that aren't reported as part of the official statistics. But here's just a handful of headlines from recent papers, including the New York Times headline, "In 1 week in April, 4 toddlers shot and killed themselves." On average, last year, in 2015, people were getting shot by toddlers on a weekly basis. And I think it's time that we start talking about this epidemic of young kids, as young as 1 or 2 years old, getting their hands on weapons and either killing themselves or killing their parents or their brothers or their sisters. And that we start talking about the fact that this isn't happening anywhere else in the world. So here's the rates of gun deaths per 100,000, and this is children and teens. We're going to take high-income countries. I mean, it's not close. Canada, our neighbor, is the next highest with 0.75 per 100,000, but 3.24 children and teens die from gun homicides, gun deaths, accidental, intentional, every year. Other countries barely register. And there's nothing unique about the nature of American children that explain this away. The only thing that can explain this is the large number of unsafe weapons that are available to children. And so, Mr. President, I want to just talk for a little bit today about what's happening out there. So here's the broader number. On average, every day, 46 people are shot or killed by accident with a gun. And in 2015, there were at least 278 unintentional shootings at the hands of young children and teenagers. So these are young kids and teenagers unintentionally firing a weapon. We know that there are at least 278, and the New York Times found that unintentional shootings occurred roughly twice as often as the records indicate because of idiosyncrasies in terms of how such deaths from accidental shootings are classified. We know that there are about 1.7 million children and youth under the age of 18 who are living in homes with loaded and unlocked firearms. 1.7 million kids are in homes with loaded and unlocked firearms. And a Harvard survey showed that children who live in gun-owning households, by a rate of 70%, and these are kids under the age of 10, 70% of kids under the age of 10 who live in households that have a gun knew where their parents stored their guns, even when they were hidden. And 36% of those kids, under 10 years old, reported that they had handled the weapon themselves. 1 out of 3 kids under 10 had found the weapon and had handled the gun themselves. One analysis found that 70% of unintentional child deaths from firearms could have been prevented if that firearm had simply been stored, locked, or unloaded. And so this is a part of the story of gun violence in this country that doesn't often get talked about, but given this one horrific week we had in April, maybe we can have a conversation about what we can do to try to reduce the number of accidental shootings that happen at the hands of little kids. And so my goal in these speeches is to tell you who these victims are. And so as hard as it is, let me tell you a little bit about some of the children who passed away in this week during April. Holston Cole was a 3-year-old from Dallas, Georgia, who shot himself with his father's loaded gun on April 26th. The gun, according to his father, was located in a backpack. Holston removed it from the backpack and then accidentally fired the weapon. Autopsy results confirm that the shot was both accidental and self-inflicted. After the gun fired, Holston's father called 911. I wouldn't recommend that you listen to the recording. You'll hear the father wailing, "No, no, stay with me, Holston. Can you hear me? Daddy loves you, Holston. Holston, please, please." This was a kid that was full of energy from morning until night, as his relatives described. His pastor, who officiated Holston's funeral, remembered Holston as a boy who loved superheroes, and sometimes wrestle cardboard boxes. He loved to play in small, inflatable, bouncy castles whenever he could. Shaquille Cornegay was 2 years old when on April 21st in Kansas City, Missouri, she died after accidentally shooting herself in the head with her father's gun. She had been taking a nap when taking a nap with her father, when she found the gun under a pillow on the bed where her father generally kept it. Her father woke up from the nap to Shaquille by his bed, bleeding and crying, the gun at her feet. Shaquille's mother was devastated by her daughter's loss and noted that her daughter's first word was "Daddy." She was buried in a pink coffin, her favorite doll by her side, and a tiara strategically placed to hide the self-inflicted gunshot wound to her forehead. And finally, and I promise I'll stop, Kyan Shelton, 2 years old, same week, Indianapolis, Indiana, shot and killed himself with a handgun that he found in his mother's purse. She had briefly stepped away when the toddler climbed onto the kitchen counter and reached for her mother's purse where a cell phone was ringing, and he found the weapon. He fired the weapon and he wounded his shoulder. In critical condition, he was quickly taken to a nearby hospital, but he died shortly thereafter. A neighbor who lived across the street remembers that Kyan had just learned how to ride a bicycle. He was out on his little bicycle with training wheels. Everybody knew that he and his mother used to keep watch of the stray dogs in the neighborhood, trying to keep their neighbors safe. He was 2 years old. He died because he was reaching for a ringing cell phone in his mom's bag, and he shot himself and died. There's a way to solve this. I mean, I know we're not supposed to have props on the floor, but this is a cell phone. It opens and closes based upon my fingerprint. There is technology ready and available to make sure that weapons can only be fired by the owner of that weapon. And yet, there is a pretty open conspiracy in the gun industry today to prevent that technology from becoming available to consumers. Smith & Wesson tried. They tried to develop a smart weapon, but they were boycotted. They were boycotted by the rest of the gun industry. When retailers have tried to sell smart guns in their stores, they have faced boycotts regularly, and in some cases, even threats of physical violence. And that doesn't make sense to most people. Why on earth would the gun industry not want, or the gun lobby not want, for safe guns to be an option, to be available? Well, from what I understand, it's rooted in a law that was passed a decade ago by New Jersey that says that if smart gun technology is developed, that it would be mandatory. Well, first of all, that's one state's law. So there's no national conspiracy to mandate that every single gun be a smart gun. But let's play this out. Let's say that technology was developed so that you could assure that no gun could be fired if it wasn't you or another authorized user of the gun. I mean, I think it would be logical for us to have a conversation as to whether or not that should be mandatory. Maybe we won't develop the technology that's fail-safe enough. Maybe it'll always make sense to have that as to be an option. But when we've figured out how to make cars safer, we've required that technology to be built in as a part of the car. And so I don't think we're to the point where we could discuss making that technology mandatory on guns, but I wouldn't suggest that it would be something that we should rule out. And to the extent that a retailer or a gun maker wants to invest in understanding how to make a gun more fail-safe, how to build in this kind of technology, whether it be your fingerprint or other biometrics, other guns are connected to a wristband that you may wear. They should be able to sell those. They should be able to make them without facing reprisals from the rest of the gun lobby and the gun industry. I mean, shouldn't we try to do something to prevent these deaths, one every week last year? That's just people that were shot by toddlers, in addition to the dozens more children who are injured or killed themselves accidentally by a weapon. You know, I struggle to try to figure out the ways in which we can come together on this issue. I certainly understand that there are difficult compromises on issues like the prohibition of certain weapons. But smart gun technology should be something that we should be able to come together on. The president has taken steps on his own. He's started a process by which federal agencies would help to stimulate research in smart gun technology, maybe with the goal of a pilot program being developed at a law enforcement agency to try to buy some of these weapons. So the president's taking steps on his own, but we could do something together. And we should, because it's only a problem here. It's not a problem anywhere else. And so to me, that's got to tell us that we're doing it wrong, and that there's something more that we can do so that this reality, that U.S. children and teens are 17 times more likely to die from a gun than children in the 25 other high-income countries combined, isn't a reality for much longer. If there's anything we could do to stop there from being another Kian, another Shaquille, another Holston, we should do it. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back the floor.